Hello and welcome back to the second part of Anglo-Saxon Christmas, where we're now going to look at the Anglo-Saxon Christian tradition during this period. So welcome back and thank you for joining me. So what better way to start off looking at Anglo-Saxon Christmas than to really set the scene, because to an Anglo-Saxon Christian, Christmas was not the most important time of the year. Now, I would risk saying this, and I'm pretty happy to say this, that Christmas is the biggest festival in the Western world's calendar at the moment. Whether if that's celebrated in the Christian tradition, or if you're doing it in a secular manner where it's a gathering with friends and family and food and all of those sort of things. But that hasn't always been the case. Back in the Anglo-Saxon period, the most important festival of the year was Easter for the Anglo-Saxon Christians. And the reason why is because that's the time of year when Christ was crucified and died for people's sins, and there was a forgiveness for sins, and therefore that was seen as the most important part of the Christian religious calendar. And that continued through the Middle Ages until very much the early modern period, and then in the Victorian period, that's when we start seeing Christmas overtaking Easter as the most important Christian celebration, because of people like Queen Victoria and Charles Dickens, but we'll cover that in another episode. But to an Anglo-Saxon, Christmas would have been important because it was obviously the birth of Christ, his entering into the world, and the importance of the fact that he was God through a virgin birth and things like that. But overall, it wasn't as important as Easter when you obviously have the forgiveness of sins. So there's an interesting one for you right there. So when you've got that in your mind, you then have to look at how Christmas was celebrated and what it was viewed as during the Anglo-Saxon period. Now we do start seeing the growth of Christmas as a festival during this period because of the fact that during this period we actually see Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, get crowned on Christmas Day. Now when he gets crowned on Christmas Day, this sets a tradition for European kings. They want to be crowned on Christmas Day because of the connections with Jesus. Obviously, if the greatest king, the King of Kings within the Christian faith, is born on that day, if you're a king, if you're crowned on that day, then you're sort of fitting in with the whole story of Jesus, that point where royal kingship is then connected obviously to the Christian God. And you see this later on with William the Conqueror also getting crowned on Christmas Day in 1066. So there's a continuation of that as you enter into the Middle Ages, as we sort of view them within history. But when you've got that tradition going on, obviously Christmas was also seen as important slightly earlier on, where we have an Anglo-Saxon bishop, or the Archbishop of York, Egbert of York, setting out the 12 days of Christmas. And the 12 days of Christmas back then were days of fasting, attending vigils, going to Christmas services, and giving out alms and gifts to your friends, your families, and to monasteries. And so that was how you framed it back then. That was a time of reflection, at a time of the year when the world seemed dead. You have no leaves on the trees, you've probably got snow on the ground's hard and icy, the sky is grey. It's a time when the world seems to have died, and then you have Christ entering the world, bringing life and light into it. And so you'd have that focus on Jesus and that focus on his birth during the Christmas period for the Anglo-Saxons. Those services would come and become very important as you have people gathering together to celebrate that bringing of life into the world and that forgiveness of sin through Jesus. The gift giving as well was very important because there was a sort of importance of giving gifts to the poor. So that was in a form of Christian charity, and then also giving gifts to one another. So you'd see the more powerful in society giving gifts to their retainers, to their lords, and keeping up that social connection at that time of year. But also you'd see gifts being given as well to monasteries, so the monasteries could then do their work of caring for the poor as well. And then that expanded throughout the rest of the Anglo-Saxon period and became more and more important. The Anglo-Saxon king Alfred the Great, a king of Wessex, he actually saw this as a very, very important time of year, and he really stepped up his importance of Christmas. And so he would worship and really staunchly kept those 12 days as a time of prayer and fasting. And there's a couple of different reasons for this. First of all, Alfred was a deeply religious man, and so this was seen as a part of his expression of his faith, his expression of his Christianity. But alongside this as well, his stepmother was actually the great-granddaughter of Charlemagne. So he had that connection with Charlemagne and the importance of that time of year when Charlemagne had been crowned, but also the fact that the prayer, the fasting, all of that would be connected in with his understanding of his faith as a Christian at that time. So he sees that as very important. And even though that caused for him to have trouble later on, because some historians have suggested that he lost against the Vikings in 878 because of the fact that he had so strictly kept the 12 days of Christmas with the fasting that his army was weak and wasn't able to fight against the Viking invaders at that time. Though overall he did finally win, and he then proceeded to lay the foundations of what would become England as we recognize it today. So that sort of brought forwards Christmas with that following of the 12 days of Christmas, the crowning of kings, and the time of year when kings would choose to be crowned due to the connection to Christianity, and that time of prayer, fasting, focusing on vigils and gift giving to both the monasteries and the poor that set up the foundation of Anglo-Saxon Christmas as we understand it. And it's actually the Anglo-Saxons themselves that gave us the word Christmas, or Christ's Mass. And so when they created that, they then that was first recorded in 1038. And so we get the word for Christmas from the Anglo-Saxons themselves. So I really hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You've been able to understand how the Christian Anglo-Saxons would celebrate Christmas and how that festival looked for them at that time of year. As always, please do like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, and I look forward to telling you more stories about history in the near future. Until then though, stay safe and well, and Merry Christmas. Da, 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 da.